So last time we got all of the work done kind of around this nut slot, so that's kind of ready to go in, and we also got most of the work completed on the transition into the headstock. There's still a little bit of cleaning up to do there, but I'm going to leave that until we've done the next step, which is actually to finally get this binding installed. The binding channels have been cut for a little while and they're all kind of ready to go. This has been a little bit of a faff, I'm not going to lie, getting everything to kind of work how I wanted around this transition. I think for me, I've got the best compromise. There will be a little bit of refining work to do just to make everything work absolutely spot on, but I'm pretty confident we can get this finished off very nicely. There was one or two suggestions in the comments after the last episode for how I could go about this. I think a really good one was someone suggested just actually getting rid of this element here past the nut and using a Gibson style nut, so we could just butt the binding straight up to the end of that. That would have been one way of doing it, but for me I think this way is going to be the one that I would prefer. There is a little bit of an issue here. There's a little bit more material there than I would like, which means that once the binding is in place there's going to be an awkward little piece of wood in this corner. What I'm going to do, as you can probably see there with the pencil line, is I'm just going to slightly reprofile that. It's about 4 or 5 mil, which means I'll probably have to just move the tuners up a tiny little bit just to accommodate that. But other than that, I think we should be good to go, and it will give us the look that we're after. So this is actually a fair bit of work to be cracking on with. Getting this binding on is going to be fairly straightforward, but it is quite labour intensive. I'm actually going to start at this end and do the little cutout, and to do that I've already made off camera just a little bit of a pre-formed section to go in there, and a little tool that I will use in conjunction with a sash cramp just to kind of push that into place and get a really good fit. So I'll get some acetone prepared and we can crack on with that. And as I say, pretty standard for me in these situations. If you've seen me putting binding in recently, I stick to the acetone technique because it works really well for me. And this is just simply bog standard solvent grade acetone, a syringe with a little blunt needle on, draw a little bit up. Now I'm going to use a sash cramp for this one piece because it's a little bit awkward. So I'm simply going to kind of set up that as best I can. Just clamp it something like in position. And I'm just going to kind of squeeze a little bit of acetone in there. Way too much, but it'll be okay. The trouble you sometimes have with rosewood is the acetone leaches the pigment out of the wood, so it can get a little bit on the messy side, but we are where we are, I'm afraid. I'll just tighten that clamp up and mop up any excess. So I'm going to leave that for a few minutes just to set up, let the acetone dry out, and then we can come back and start to think about doing the rest of it. Okay, so just loosen that off, a bit of wood out, and that looks to have stuck in there very nicely indeed. So get all of this cleared away, and I'm not going to try and miter these because I just think that's too much of an ask. So I'm just going to cut them off flush with the end of the fretboard, and then we can bring the rest of the binding round onto like a butt joint with it. And I'm pretty sure using the acetone and enough pressure will kind of meld those two surfaces together, so you won't actually see any kind of a join. And that's actually gone quite smoothly. So next up is we need to get the big bits of the binding out and start to get those worked into place. And the way this goes is fairly straightforward. Basically, I'm just going to kind of tape it in place at regular intervals. Just so it's in the right position. Like that. And then what I'll do is I'll go down, I'll introduce a little bit of acetone to a section, tape that all in place really securely, move on, do the same until we get to the end. Then I can take these first bits of tape off and kind of fill in the gaps. Usually the acetone wicks underneath and it will do a fairly decent job of sticking that down, but there might just be a few gaps. Once I've kind of come down to here and got all the straight bits done, I will then kind of start to work it round that corner. It'll probably need a little bit of heat because it is quite a tight bend. So I'll start up here, get that all sorted out, and then work my way along. And I know I've said this in previous videos, but the reason I like using acetone to do this job is because there is so much less cleanup to do than if you do it with super glue, which is the other alternative, or it's another alternative. There are kind of other adhesives you can use. I've never used them myself. I started off using super glue. Kind of worked okay for me, but it was messy. So I then kind of went on to this technique, and I've been super happy with it. And I always think that if you're happy, you should perhaps stick with it. And like I say, with that done, we can now start to just kind of work this around the corner, but it is quite a tight bend there, so get a bit of heat on it. But you do need to be careful. You really don't need to put a lot of heat into this. And as soon as it kind of cools down, it holds that shape to a certain extent, so Get a little bit of acetone in there. Tape it up. So I think I'll leave that now for probably half an hour or so, just for all that acetone to properly dry up, and then we can come back and start looking at the other half. Okay, and there's the first bit put on, and seems to have gone on quite nicely. Looking good. And I just need to see if I can, I don't know, I'm going to do this, perhaps put it in the vise and just kind of trim this down a little bit. It's close. Perhaps just a bit of work with the chisel just to get it properly. It's almost there, perhaps just a little bit of filing in there just to get it absolutely spot on, but we're very close to where we need to be with that. So with that done, we can turn this round and do exactly the same trick on the other side with the next little bit of binding. And with that all nice and dried out now, I'm just going to take a standing knife blade in this case and start just kind of scraping that down. Trying to follow the radius of the board as best I can. Until we get it nice and level. Which is fairly straightforward because there isn't really that much to take off. Now, when I did the body binding, I used a single-sided razor blade to scrape them down. And someone did ask in the comments whether I'd used a standing knife blade before, because they seem to remember me doing that. And I have. And I've used it for body binding as well. But the reason I used the single-sided razor blade, because the binding was sitting proud kind of on the inner edge of it, and I didn't want to scrape it all down evenly, otherwise I'd be scraping it very, very thin and we wouldn't have the kind of edge that we wanted, kind of in this dimension on the edge of the body. So I used a single-sided razor blade in that instance because I could actually put a bend on it and it would stay bent, which meant I could concentrate my effort on the inner edge of the binding. These blades, they're kind of like high carbon steel, and they kind of bend but immediately bend back, so they're not really any good for that technique. But on this job, where I can take it down square and straight, they're just fine. In fact, I'd say they're probably a little bit better because they're a bit more substantial. So that's the edges kind of smoothed off to the top of the fretboard, which only really leaves us these little pieces now at the end here to sort out. And I think the quickest way of doing those is, I'm just going to clamp this down to the bench to stop it moving about. And I'm just going to kind of start scooping this out with a chisel. Get the bulk of it off. And then I can just finish that with a scrape with the blade. And we're good to go. And I think for the time being, that's probably where I need to be with that. And I actually think it looks quite nice. Obviously a little bit of cleaning up to do still. So still a couple of little bits and pieces we need to do. We need to remove this material here just to make this transition a bit nicer. I'm not going to do that just yet though, because I want to smooth these edges right the way down along the sides of the neck. And we've also got some position markers to put in along this top edge. So we'll crack on with that now, and then we can sort out this headstock transition in a little while. And again, literally very quick scrape down with the razor blade. Is all it needs. We've just got a bit of, it's actually 600 paper, just to give that a clean up. Turn that over and do the other side. So with that done, we can now start marking out for our position markers. And I've just got some black rod here. Which is 2mm. So what I need to do is, I think this is going to look best if I can get this centered into the binding. So just run a pencil line down there, and then I need to kind of mark the beginning and the end of each of the positions where there is a marker. And then it's a case of, I like to use a centering rule on this because it just makes it a little bit quicker to do. A little mark on there. Square it across. Quick awl mark. Two mil drill bit. Bit of super glue. Bit of a file. And there we have the first one. So I'm just going to get this in the vise and kind of work my way down the rest of them now, and join you back when it's done. Okay, and there's all the position markers put in, and I've checked they are all in the right places, so that's good. Most of the smoothing down work is done on this binding now, and only really leaves us with this little bit of work to do at the top of the headstock. But I'm going to leave that till next time. I'm going to end this episode here because I think we've gone quite far enough. I'll be back in a couple of days' time when we'll get that sorted out, and we will also start to perhaps look at getting some frets knocked into this. But that'll be for next time. So until then, don't forget to hit that like button if you've enjoyed this. Subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll look forward to seeing you then. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.